talk a little bit about tightness in the hip because it's super common, and unless you're doing something to counterbalance the activities that fill your daily life, probably your hips are tight in one direction or another. And hip function affects pelvic floor function, affects ab function. So this is why we want to have good, strong, mobile, flexible hips, because it leads to good, strong, flexible, the rest of your body, abs, pelvic floor, etc. Okay, so here's a pelvis. It's facing forward and then it's facing sideways. Okay, and today we're considering the balance between the front of your hip and the back of your hip. So if you're somebody who tends to clench and hold tension in the back of your hip, you're going to be tighter here. It doesn't mean that you can't be tight in the front of your hip, but that's why you want to check, because if you're not tight in the front of your hip, you don't need to spend your time stretching it. And this is why I'm a huge proponent of understanding what your body specifically needs and targeting your efforts to your body, because then you don't waste your time stretching your hip flexors when they're not tight. You could be strengthening them because they're weak, or you could be moving on to some other part of your body that's more appropriate. So this is how I go about things in my online program, is helping you assess yourself and understand what your body needs so you can target your efforts towards that. Okay, so if you lay on the floor and you find that you're tight in the front of your hip, then let's stretch it out. Let's get better motion there. Okay, but if you're somebody who clenches, you're likely not going to be as tight in the front of your hip as if you're somebody who tends to hold length in the back of their hip and they tighten in the front of their hip. And they're controlling their hip by holding this tension in the front of their hip and their hip flexors and maybe in the small of their back. So if you're holding tension in the front of your hip and the small of your back, you're going to have tight hip flexors. And in that scenario, you're going to want to stretch out your hip flexors. And I'm going to go into more detail on this one in my stories tomorrow. But for today, if you're somebody who tends to hold tension in the back of your hip, you might or might not have tight hip flexors, but they're probably not overly tight, because this excessive tension that you clench, that you hold in the back of your hip, is how you're controlling your hip. You're clenching because it is your means of providing stability. And if we want to stop clenching, we have to have another option. And that option, or one of the options in that scenario, is to work on strengthening the front of your hip so that you can create more balance, where this side can do less because this side is capable of doing more. But in order for it to be capable, you have to strengthen it.